Tell stories. People can tell stories in many different ways. Most of the time, this is done through writing, and people change the story based on the language they use, the creative word choice they find. But there's a lot of other ways you can tell a story that many don't think of initially. One of those ways is visually. So here we're going to look at some examples of how BLM riots are presented visually. The first picture comes from The New Yorker. The New Yorker is just a general magazine having information on a lot of things across their entire field. They're considered left-leaning by a lot of other sources, but not too far per se. They don't identify that way, but that's what other people have seen. The visual appeal of this slide, we can notice first a few basic rules that show up. The first of these is rule of halves. This kind of shows up where the sign essentially creates a border that creates a rule of halves, but you can also see a second rule in there, and that is another possible rule of thirds. Of course, nothing lines up perfectly in images, so this is just kind of speculatory, but generally the photo looks pretty good because it follows rules like these. The next thing you should notice is that the photo is black and white. This can help with the message it's sending. There's two reasons that it could be black and white. The first is simply that it's a large crowd and then people are wearing different clothes. So maybe it's just to make things simpler and your eyes focus on what's in the front and not all the different colors that are distracting in the back. But perhaps it's also sending subtle racial relations messages or other sorts of timeliness things. One of the most important things in this is obviously the sign, which says to serve and to protect who. This is a direct reference to the LAPD famous motto, which extends to a lot of other police departments as well, showing a distrust in the police force. Also, probably the most important signal in this picture is the position of all of these people in the riot itself. They're all in a very non-threatening position, purposely showing their hands up to show a sort of innocence, and this sends a message that is definitely positive between the signs, text, and these people's body language. This picture is generally positive of BLM rights and represents it that way. Next picture comes from the US Sun, which is based off of the company from Britain, just the Sun. They are generally considered right-leaning by others, but also don't necessarily identify that way. Again, just like the last picture, you have to look at how visually appealing the image is and what it seems to be like to the eye. First, you can notice, again, rule of halves, just like the other picture. The object seems to split the picture in half, and there's just an easy halfway point to find. Rule of thirds follows the same concept and actually forms a pretty well-structured picture. The fire is also in a very good spot to be visually appealing because your eyes look at the center, then don't know what to look at, and look to the top left where the fire is. Overall, the image will do a good job at displaying whatever it's attempting to display. Looking again at the fire, you can also see the use of negative space as the fire adds light and a lot of things to the left side, but as you go further to the right side, it becomes a lot more blank. Now, what is the actual message of this picture? The fire, of course, usually has a negative connotation, and in this case, it kind of follows the same line. The object that's on fire doesn't look like a terrible object, but it doesn't look like a really good one either. So it's not showing insane amounts of destruction, but it doesn't seem like this is a good fire either. Because of that, the fire in this picture is generally going to be negative. What is the lady throwing in, however? It's just cardboard, so it's nothing crazy. This has a little bit of a negative connotation towards the BLM riots, but it's not too bad. The next picture comes from New York Times, which of course is considered central by many, very prestigious, but it can also be controversially not center at times. For our purposes, it's central in this presentation. Now here we have a very unique picture. if you try to analyze it, it doesn't have that many crazy rules making it visually appealing. It just simply has an object at the center and a nice surrounding to go with that object in the center, which makes it visually appealing enough that it doesn't need all the other special rules. However, the message gets interesting once it gets into the actual article, because looking at this picture, here's another example of fire probably being negative, almost completely certainly showing a negative aspect. The article that it comes with, however, is just talking about the statistics of certain destruction, quotes from both sides of the story, and advice on how to fix the BLM riots. It's not an article against the riots themselves. The article is, again, pretty central. However, the image definitely displays a completely different message from what they're trying to say. This picture is extremely negative. It has this man in the front, and his entire surrounding is on fire. He's clearly not having a problem with that fire. He's probably involved in the situation. It's just a generally negative picture for the BLM riot movement, even though the article says otherwise, which is an example of a picture just changing the meaning of something. I won't spend too much time on Britannica because they're pretty prestigious for being central and there's a lot more information on them and the picture's not too crazy, so we'll just get right into the picture. Quickly looking at the appeal, rule of halves is made by the sign very clearly, very easily, looks visually appealing, but there's a lot more important subtle things you might not notice. Now, the article that this comes with is about the BLM riots, why they're happening, specifically the ones in the 2020s. But this is a very diverse protest that this picture comes from. And if you look around in the picture, you can see in the back a no justice, no peace sign. That completely changes the message of what's happening. However, the Britannica authors took this image because it's a perfect example of a central source that goes with, or a central picture that goes with their central article. The only thing that you can really read, that they're really trying to get you to read, is just that the signs say Black Lives Matter, which means it's just talking about the movement itself, not really motives or anything. It's just a very central picture. To the more biased presentations, we have Newsweek, which is generally considered more right-leaning. This image honestly has a lot to unpack, and the more you unpack, the more negative connotations are added to the BLM riots. So here you can see there's just a sort of visual appeal again, using depth. There's an off-picture converging point where these lines meet, and this adds depth where you can see the people in the front or the crowd in the back. It just kind of looks nice that way. But the actual message is very clear in this, and it's definitely negative. Because as you look around, you see the effects of what kinds of shots they're taking. First, looking at the wide shot, this is able to show a lot more destruction, and that's the goal of the picture, is to show the destruction clearly. For example, more fire, which in this case is again negative, because in the only case where somebody might want to burn down a building, it might be some corruption thing or maybe some corporation thing, but these are clearly very local, very small places, it seems, which makes it a definitely very negative in the eyes of basically any American citizen. Also, the wide shot utilizes the ability to capture more chaos, and if you look in the streets, you can see a lot of rubble. This is just making the situation seem out of control, not good, definitely a negative connotation. And this picture does a really good job at conveying the message that these are uh, bad riots, the message that they're trying to send. Picture comes from The Guardian, which is the only source that actually identifies as left leaning itself, whereas the other ones were purely just based on natural biases. Quickly, the first thing you notice, the man in the center, of course, but where do your eyes go? Top left as usual. There's a sign though, and that's what they probably want you to read, but it's not in a good spot to be read because it's in the center slightly to the right. It's just not a very comfortable position. What is in a comfortable position is in the top left, the graffiti, which seems to say kill cops. So whatever message they're trying to send in this picture, it doesn't matter what they're trying. It's showing a very positive and necessary connotation for the BLM riots and a very negative one against the police in general. Uh, Also, here's the only example of fire being used positively. The fire isn't actually showing the chaotic part, and if it is, it's showing, on the contrary, the man in the front being calm and collected and just showing his resolve, and that the fire and the chaos is actually necessary, perhaps, and it's part of a greater plan. Overall, this picture has a very positive connotation of BLM riots, but not just the riots themselves, even when it gets more out of control. All of the pictures side by side, showing their general biases. As you can see, sometimes that changes the meaning, sometimes it goes along very well with what the article is saying. Thank you.